Hey guys, this is John. I'm playing jamomorales in the 15-minute pool in ICC. Let's open with e4 this game. And, another opportunity to play an offbeat e4 line. Let me check this guy's stats real quick. This might determine my choice. Hard to get a read on him. He's only played 14 15-minute games. I kind of want to play another King's Gambit, but I'm going to play knight f3, and then I might play a Joko piano, actually, like bishop c4 on move 3. Haven't really played much of that. Okay, we're going to get a Philidor, actually. All right, we'll play d4. And bishop g4, this is following the course of probably the most famous chess game of all time between Paul Morphy and the Duke of Isouard and, wait, the Duke and the Count, let's say. I forgot what principalities or regions they came from. The Paris Opera House game. So Morphy played this move. D takes e5, after which bishop takes f3 is forced if black wants to avoid losing a pawn. This is known to be a sketchy line for black, so I'm surprised that this guy would play it. Knight c6. Okay, so he's going to play it in gambit style. I was not aware that this was a possibility, but then again, in chess, there's things that never cease to surprise you. So I guess if I take d6, he's going to take with the bishop and try to claim compensation. I don't really have any choice other than taking the pawn if I want to play in principled fashion, so we're doing it. So probably his plan will be bishop takes d6 and then queen e7 and then castle long. At least that would be the way that I would try to seek compensation if I were black. So how do I treat this? Do I play knight c3? Do I move this bishop first? I think knight c3 is normal. Let's play it. After queen e7, I've got a few options. Bishop b5 seems logical. Pinning the knight. Bishop e2 is probably not that bad either. I'd love to play knight d5, but I lose this e4 pawn if he puts the queen on e7. Plays knight f6 instead. I could pin with bishop g5. I could play bishop e2. I could play bishop b5. All of these moves are plausible. I'm kind of leaning towards bishop b5. That way, if ever he castles queenside, I can take on c6 and wreck black's pawn structure. I could play h3 if I want to probe the bishop and just see where it goes. He'll probably play bishop h5, though. Let's play bishop b5. This looks completely fine to me. So if castles, I will castle as well. He plays queen e7. So now, after castles and he castles, I can't take on c6 because he has the bishop takes h2 check threat, which would win my queen. Probably taking on c6 is correct right now. So if I take c6, he takes back, and then I castle. That solves the problem. Let's go ahead and follow through with our threat. It may have been beneficial to keep this pin for a while, but I think castling, or taking and then castling is the most direct way to play this. If he castles queenside now, I mean, we've already wrecked his structure, and I can sidestep the bishop takes h2 threat with queen e2, eyeing the a6 square and also defending e4. He does castle nonetheless. No fear. Yeah, queen e2 just is the way to go. So threatening queen a6. This pin could be potentially annoying. I mean, it'd be nice if he took on h3 and solved the pin issue for me, but I don't foresee that happening. I could play h3 and try to force him to take on f3, but he has bishop h5 or even pawn h5, kind of a fishing pole idea. Because if I were to take his bishop, like h3, h5, h takes g4, he can play h takes g4 himself, and if this knight moves, there's bishop h2 at the very least. I think he'll play king b7 or king b8 as prophylaxis against my queen coming in. Does play king b8. Rook e1 would be normal now, just to maybe threaten e5. If I play e5 directly, he can take on f3, so that's why I don't want to do it now. Yeah, I think rook e1 is fine, so we'll play it. He might put a rook on e8, like let's say rook he8 or rook de8. In that case, I'll play bishop g5. Sorry for that buzzing sound if you can hear that in the background. Someone is blowing up my phone right now. I usually remember to put it on silent before I play a game, but I guess I forgot in this case. Okay, so knight d7, he's trying to come to e5. Ooh, this might allow knight d4. Knight d4, if he takes my queen, I take c6, and then take on e7. The only potential complicating factor is knight d4, bishop takes h2. Because then if king takes h2, he has queen h4 check, I move my king, and then he can successfully take here. So I'm not sure about that. And knight d4, bishop takes h2, king f1 does not look appetizing. Yeah, that's a bit sketchy. I could play h3 right now. Maybe h3 is not bad, actually. Wow, this whoever's texting me is really adamant. H3. Because then after h3, if he plays bishop h5, knight d4 becomes more of a possibility because there's no bishop takes h2. There's still bishop h2, but there's not bishop takes h2, which is a pretty significant improvement if you ask me. Yeah, actually, I think I'm going to do this move. If he takes on f3 and I take with my queen and he plays queen e5, I can just play g3. And it blocks the queen from hitting h2. Yeah, and otherwise, like bishop h5, it looks like knight d4 is a very good counter. We attack his pawn on c6 and threatening the queen, and we also hit his bishop on h5. I think that just wins material for me. Let's pre-move this capture. Ooh, he doesn't do it. Okay, so now we get a chance to play this knight d4 move. Let me just double check. I mean, it is putting our queen on pre, so we want to double and triple check the lines and make sure we're not blundering anything. Knight d4, if bishop h2, we might even be able to take it in this case. Because if he checks on e5 or d6, we have queen d6 with pawn e5. If queen here, we have f4. But knight d4, bishop h2 could also just be sidestepped with king h1. Yeah, so I think this move checks out. Bombs away. Let's do it. Seems to me if black is going to play in gambit style like this, they can't play 6 knight f6. I think that queen e7 move directly, so trying to castle queenside as quickly as possible, that would be the way to go instead. I don't see a good reply for black now. There's no way to simultaneously save c6 and also save the bishop. And in the event of bishop takes e2, we have knight takes c6 check. Let's say king b7, knight takes e7. And if he takes our knight, we take on e2, and we're up 2 clear pawns, because remember, we're already up a pawn to begin with here, and we're winning a second pawn by taking on c6. If bishop takes e2, knight takes c6 check, king b7, knight takes e7, he moves this bishop, we have escape routes through d5 or f5. Probably f5 is the best square. So our knight is not getting trapped behind enemy lines. He could play queen h4 to guard the bishop, but then we're taking on c6. If king b7, we have queen b5 check. Actually, if queen h4, it might even be better to play queen a6 directly. We have knight takes c6 check as a huge threat. So I'm not seeing how he's going to get out of this. On the previous move, I think he had to take on f3, and after queen takes, try to whip something up, but there's not much to show for the pawn deficit. That Morphy versus the Duke game, by the way, is the one game that, for some reason, throughout my chess career, I've always had memorized. Like, I memorized it when I was a kid, and I've just never forgotten the moves. It's like, it's 17 or 18 moves long, and it culminates in a very nice queen sacrifice. And like I said, it's probably the most recognizable chess game. It's a good game to show beginners and players who are just starting out in chess to illustrate the concepts of like quick development, controlling the center, the initiative. It's all of those principles rolled into one. Nothing much relevant to talk about right now. We're just using a short-term tactical operation to gain an even larger advantage. There's nothing positionally really to speak of. Usually I like to talk on my opponent's time as much as possible, but occasionally you run into situations like this where there's not much to be said. Hope you guys are enjoying the Norway chess tournament. As I'm making this video, round 4 is currently in progress. So it's checking out the games on chessbomb.com. That's my go-to site for watching chess tournaments and games. Magnus Carlsen currently on half out of 3. Don't think anyone saw that coming. I was very impressed with Caruana's victory over Carlsen in the Berlin Wall. Caruana made it look very easy. Just kind of steamrolled him strategically. And I see Kramnik had something kind of salty to say in the press conference. Apparently, Kramnik is not at the tournament, but he got in touch with one of the commentators or something, and he said that Carlsen has no business playing the Berlin because he doesn't understand it, which is quite a thing to say to the world champion and a guy who's beaten you before. But Kramnik will forever have a claim to the Berlin defense since he famously used it in 2000 to defeat Garry Kasparov. Well, he didn't defeat him in a Berlin game, but that was like his main defense as black, and in all the E45 games he employed it and held against Kasparov, who had no way to breach the Berlin Wall. Okay, so we're just following this line where we win another pawn, and as I said, our knight is not in danger of getting trapped, because if black moves the light square bishop back to like h5 or a6 or something, or c4, we have escape routes. I'll probably go through f5, but we could also go through d5 if needed. He takes on e7. Okay. Yeah, again, this doesn't really bother us. It just rook takes e2 is fine. Could also take with the knight. Not sure there's a huge difference. Yeah, not really. If rook takes e2, he does have bishop f6. I could just play bishop d2 then, though, to defend the knight. Yeah, let's just take with a rook. There's also bishop f6, knight d5. But in that case, he might play knight c5. If I were to take his bishop on f6, there's rook d1 check. Could cause some minor inconvenience. Yeah, so bishop d2 is probably just fine here. Although bishop d2, maybe he can go knight b6 and try to come into c4. Because if bishop d2, knight b6, I play b3, there's the shot rook takes d2, removing the defender of the c3 knight. Still not really concerned, but what other moves could I play here? I mean, I could just leave my knight and develop, but then he gets to take on c3, and he could at least then claim that I have bad pawns. Look at knight d5 again. So if knight d5, knight c5, I want to complete my development. I want to play bishop f4, but he takes on e4, removes the defender. I think bishop d2, knight b6, and then maybe just bishop e1 is fine. Then if the knight comes into c4, he's not even really threatening to take on b2 because of rook b1. Yeah, that's completely fine. Let's do that. Not our first choice as a post for this bishop, but it's all right. Once we take care of black's short-term play, it's going to be a pretty easy technical win, or at least it should be. Brings his rook into the equation. Now I might play knight d5 because if he takes on b2, we have rook b1. So the timing on this move might be better now. Knight d5, bishop d4, I can play c3. Could also just double up my rooks right now. But knight d5 is kind of nice. Yeah, let's play it. Why not? If knight c5, we'll take on f6 and then maybe just f3. You can play f5, but I have e5 in that case. Or even bishop e3 against f5. Is he lagging? His time is standing still. I'm not lagging. Ping time is 41 milliseconds. I think he's lagging big time. He is. I'm just looking back at his opening while we're waiting here. Yeah, I think this position is already almost critical after knight c3. Just seems to me if he wants to get anything, queen e7 has to be played. I can't play knight d5, like I said, because of queen takes e4. So queen e7 with the express goal of castling queenside. But still queen e7, bishop b5. And if castles, I can take on c6 then. So I think that would be the way I would go. Hopefully he comes back, otherwise we're just going to win this game. He's going to leg out and flag. Yeah, he disconnected and forfeited. But the position was losing. Okay, let's go take a look at this one. So it's a Philidor, d6, then d4. If you're going to play this line for black, taking on d4 is the way to go. And then white can take with either the queen or the knight. I usually take with the knight. And after knight f6, knight c3, the game can go down a couple different directions, but usually bishop e7 is played. And here, last time I had this position, OTB, I played bishop f4, trying to organize like queen d2 and castling queenside, but I didn't get that great of a position. So I think the Philidor, it's solid enough to play for black. I wouldn't make it like my main repertoire choice if I were black, but it's probably worth a shot or two on occasion. Might be a line that I want to try playing, actually, from the black side. Black can also play after d4, just knight d7. This could lead to the hand-hand variation of the Philidor. So, like knight c3, knight f6, bishop c4, bishop e7. And black just intends to castle, play c6 and queen c7, and usually try to mobilize the queenside pawns, like a6 and b5 eventually. So that's another way to play it. Bishop g4 has long been thought to be dubious, and I don't see any reason why a game like this would dispute that assessment, because after takes, Morphy versus the Duke and the Count went bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, then d takes e5, but after bishop c4, Morphy got a huge lead in development and won in crushing fashion. If you're not aware of that game, go check it out. It's really nice. I won't spoil it for you. But my opponent played knight c6, and then here, bishop takes, knight c3. Let's just put the engine on this right here. Engine says knight f6. I mean, I thought this move to be critical, but I was just planning on playing bishop b5 and pinning the knight. Yeah, I just don't see the compensation for black. White is too solid. Our king is not in any danger, so he's not going to whip up an initiative against our monarch here. So knight f6, we played bishop b5, queen e7. So here I mentioned the line, like if I castle, he can then castle, and you see the eval swings in black's favor now. Part of the reason for that is if bishop takes c6, he has this bishop takes h2 discovery against our queen. So for that reason, I want to trade on c6 first.
Check.
So take, b takes, and then castles. He castles long. Understandable, but it might not be the best. Computer says castling short is better. Because when he castles long, he's going right into a weakened kingside position, or queenside position. He's already played b takes c6. His king doesn't have shelter over here. And this is an easy position for white to play. Queen e2. I'm up a pawn, and I'm better from a structural point of view as well. Rook e1, I think this is good. Just overprotect the e-pawn. Also make him think about the threat of e5. He plays knight d7, and now h3. So I want to go knight d4 right away, but there's bishop takes h2. Got to be heads up about stuff like that. So since knight d4 entails like some risk, you notice I was like looking at ways that he could deviate from simply like taking our queen. You know, I was looking at the checks. I was looking at queen moves he could make. Because if I had just assumed that I was going to be fine after knight d4 because of the threat of knight takes c6, that would have been a bad assumption by me, because this bishop takes h2 move throws everything off kilter. If I take, he has queen h4 check, and then when the king moves, he picks up the queen. Likewise, if I ignore the bishop, like, I don't know, king f1, he can take our queen with check, so king h1, I guess, would be forced. But then queen h4, and bad things are going to befall white pretty soon. Our queen is under attack. If the queen moves, there's this little mating pattern.
Check.
Check here, and bring the queen in.
Checkmate.
So always got to double and triple check those moves that can trip you up, like in between checks, like bishop takes h2. But throwing in h3 makes all the difference, because now after bishop h5, this move works perfectly. If bishop h2, we can just ignore it. We can play king h1 if needed. I guess king takes h2 does work, because as I mentioned, there's no queen h4. He can check either here or here, but we have a response to that. Like queen d6, there's e5. And if he takes our knight, we take on h5. We're up a piece. And if queen e5, I think just f4 is good. Hit his queen, and again, if he takes d4, we take here. We're going to be ahead a piece. So maybe he missed the knight d4 move entirely. If he had seen it, he probably would have captured on f3 and tried to play this position, but even here, there's not enough compensation. So here, knight d4. Interesting that the computer likes this move even better. Hit the bishop and then play knight d4. And then if black defends the pawn on c6, we probably would not want to play f4 because of bishop c5 pinning our knight. But Knight takes
Check.
c6, knight takes c6, queen
Check.
d5 check is possible. And then we'll take here next move. I still like our line better. I think knight d4 right away is a cleaner way to do it. Even though the computer prefers that other variation. So he took here. Just doesn't have any good alternatives. Like I said, there's no way to simultaneously defend c6 and h5. So he takes
Check.
e2, we take on c6, take e7. I think rook takes or knight takes could be played. I don't know that it makes much difference. Maybe knight takes is even slightly better, just because of that bishop f6 possibility, but it's close to being a moot point. Both moves are winning for white. So bishop f6. I played bishop d2. The computer says knight d5 is better. Yeah, I wasn't sure about that move in view of, I think knight c5 is what I was looking at. Knight takes, and I thought maybe rook d1 is disruptive.
Check.
Probably it's a situation, though, where inconvenience is only temporary. f3, and then I'll play b3 and bishop b2 more than likely. But in the short run, he has some activity. So bishop d2 is a safe move to connect the rooks and also defend c3. I thought he should try knight b6 at least, trying to come in here. And I was ready to play bishop e1 against that. Prophylaxis against the knight coming in. Note that b3 would be a horrible move because of rook takes d2. And then after I take, he takes here, and he's suddenly winning because he's forking the two rooks. So here, knight d5, and at this point he disconnected, but as you can see, it's plus 2, 2.5, somewhere in that range. We're hitting his bishop, and if he takes on b2, I have rook b1 just winning on the spot. I'm going to go up another piece. So black would move the bishop most likely to d4 or e5, but it's just two clear pawns, and black has no compensation. So probably black should not repeat this variation with bishop g4, I think, overall, but definitely not this gambit line. Well, I don't know. I mean, bishop g4 itself is probably the culprit. There might just, I mean, as Morphy versus the Duke and the Count shows, this position is probably already bad for black. So I think if black's going to play this line, they should either take on d4 on move 3 or play knight d7 and go for that hand-ham Philidor. All right, hope you guys enjoyed this game. I'll be back tomorrow with another standard game. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.